6 people from elite gated communities died by accident: falls, electrocution, mushrooms, gas. In every case, one man kept appearing: a polite landscape designer. When his perfect lawn started choking a woman right in front of a written-off detective, it became clear: this killer doesn't get his hands dirty. He turns the air itself into a weapon. The asphalt beneath the wheels of Marcus Brennan's old Chevy was too smooth. The car glided over it soundlessly, like floating on water, and it irritated him more than anyone watching might have guessed. He was used to potholes, to the rattle of metal against concrete, to the jarring that reminded him reality existed. Here, though, the road lay like a flawless ribbon, every curve calculated to keep drivers comfortable. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter, feeling his fingertips slide against the worn leather wrap. The gate arm at Whispering Pines Estates rose slowly, with deliberate self-importance. The guard in the booth yawned without glancing at his credentials, nodding as if doing him a favor. Marcus drove through, squinting against the morning glare. The lawns flanking the road gleamed after overnight watering, droplets on the grass sparkling like shattered glass. Security cameras hung from poles, aimed not toward the gates, but inward. They weren't watching for outsiders. They were watching their own. That told Marcus more than any report could. The residents feared each other more than the world beyond these walls. The houses stood identical, as if stamped from a single architectural blueprint. Ivory facades, metal roofing, tall fences of dark wood. The silence here felt unnatural. No barking dogs, no children's voices, no hum of traffic. Only the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant drone of a lawnmower somewhere around the corner. Marcus drove slowly, scanning house numbers. A familiar pressure built in his chest, heavy and sticky. Places like this always aimed for one thing: to make death look like a mistake, not a crime. House number 17 stood out only because of the vehicles parked at the entrance. 2 department-issued Fords sat blocking the driveway. Beside them, a white Lexus with out-of-state plates. Marcus parked off to the side, cut the engine, and sat motionless for several seconds, staring at the front door. His hands moved automatically toward the pack of mints in his coat pocket, but he stopped himself halfway. He'd quit smoking a year ago, but the gestures remained. Climbing out of the car, Marcus straightened his shirt collar and headed toward the house. The coat hung loosely on him, the cuffs frayed at the edges, but the fabric was good quality, solid. He'd bought it 10 years back and never replaced it. Why would he? The thing still worked. A young detective in jeans and a leather jacket opened the door. His eyes swept over Marcus, paused on the badge, and he gave a short nod.
"You Brennan?" "That's right. Upstairs, bathroom."
Marcus wiped his feet on the mat and stepped inside. The foyer greeted him with marble and mirrors. A staircase led to the second floor with wide steps, the railings polished wood. The smell of cleanliness, expensive chemicals, and something else, something faintly sweet, almost imperceptible. Death didn't always smell the same, but Marcus had learned to recognize it. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway. The door stood wide open, 2 forensic techs in white coveralls working inside. Light assaulted his eyes from recessed fixtures, a large uncurtained window, white tile covering walls and floor. Marcus squinted, crossed the threshold, and froze. The woman lay in the bathtub. Her body was positioned too carefully, head tilted back, arms along her sides, legs slightly bent. The water was murky but shallow, barely covering her thighs. A hairdryer rested on the tub's edge, the cord dangling toward an outlet near the floor, the plug halfway pulled out. Marcus moved closer, stepping around the tech with the camera. He leaned in without touching anything. The victim's face was calm, lips parted slightly, eyes closed, skin pale but not bluish. Her hands were relaxed. No scratches on the tub's rim, No signs of convulsion. Fingers unclenched, nails intact. Marcus straightened, scanning the room. The marble floor was dry. No splashes, no puddles. A towel hung perfectly level on its hook. Cosmetics on the shelf stood in a neat row, labels facing outward.
Time of death?
Marcus asked without looking at the tech.
About 8 hours ago, give or take an hour.
Who found her?
The housekeeper. Came by this morning. Door was unlocked. No answer from the owner.
Marcus nodded. He pulled a notebook from his coat's inner pocket, opened to a blank page. The pencil was already sharpened, the lead sharp. He wrote down the time, circumstances, the tech's name. Then he looked at the body again. For an accident, there was too little chaos here. Panic leaves traces, overturned objects, spilled water, scratch marks. Someone being electrocuted in a bathtub doesn't arrange themselves nicely. They thrash, try to escape, scream. Here, everything looked as though the woman had simply fallen asleep and never woken up.
Footsteps sounded behind him. Marcus turned.
In the doorway stood Captain Hayes, a stocky man in his mid-50s with a ruddy face and close-cropped graying hair. His uniform fit impeccably, but looked worn, like someone who'd long stopped trying to impress anyone. Hayes surveyed the room, then shifted his gaze to Marcus.
"Brennan, Captain."
Hayes approached the tub, glanced at the body, nodded to the tech.
"Theory?"
"Accidental death," the tech replied without looking up from his camera. "Hairdryer fell in the water."
"Classic." Hayes grunted. He turned to Marcus. "What are you doing here?"
"I was called in, on duty rotation."
"I see."
Hayes paused, staring out the window.
"This is a high-profile location, influential residence. We don't need controversy."
Marcus stayed silent. Hayes continued, his voice level, almost weary.
"The domestic angle makes sense to everyone. Woman lived alone, stress, divorce, carelessness, hairdryer, water, electrical short. Tragic, but not criminal."
"Not criminal," Marcus repeated, looking at the captain.
"Exactly."
Hayes turned toward the door.
"Write up the report, standard procedure, no unnecessary questions."
He left without waiting for a response. Marcus remained standing in the middle of the bathroom, gripping his notebook. A familiar burning sensation flared in his chest. Not anger, but something colder. Understanding. The conversation hadn't been about the woman's death. It had been about preserving the neighborhood's tranquility. Truth had already become inconvenient. The tech stood, peeling off his gloves.
"We done?"
"Yeah. Can move her now."
"Good." Marcus stepped into the hallway. 2 young plainclothes officers stood by the staircase. One typed rapidly on a tablet, the other talked on his phone, nodding and taking notes. They exchanged glances when they saw Marcus, and one of them, a guy around 25 in a designer jacket and sneakers, nodded at him.
"It's all clear already. Wet bathtub, hair dryer, stress. Textbook case." "Textbook," the second echoed without looking up from his tablet. Marcus stopped beside them.
"You canvassed the neighbors? Why?"
The first looked at him, surprised. "The housekeeper told us everything. Owner lived alone, recently divorced, anxious, was home yesterday evening, didn't answer her phone this morning."
"What about the outlet?"
"What about it? Was it working properly?"
The guy shrugged. "Electrician's coming to check."
"But what's the doubt?" "Hairdryer in water. It's obvious."
Marcus said nothing.
He pulled a mint from his pocket, unwrapped it, and popped it in his mouth. The peppermint burned his tongue with cold. He looked at the young detectives, at their tablets, at their confident faces, and felt like an outsider. His methods seemed archaic to them, his doubts irritating. To them, everything was already settled. The system had checked the database, the algorithm had produced statistics, the checklist was complete.
"All right," Marcus said, and headed toward the exit. but at the bedroom threshold, he stopped. Something caught his eye. Not a sound, not movement, but a detail breaking from the overall picture. Marcus turned his head. On the windowsill sat a potted orchid. The flower was perfect. White petals without a single blemish, leaves firm and deep green, roots visible through clear plastic, healthy, no rot. Marcus stepped closer. The soil was moist, but not waterlogged. A thin layer of moss covered the surface, carefully arranged. No dried leaves, no debris. He looked around. The bedroom gave the opposite impression. The bed unmade, clothes draped over a chair, dirty mugs on the nightstand. Dust on the shelves, the mirror streaked. The owner clearly hadn't kept up with tidiness. But the orchid was flawless. Marcus recalled the housekeeper's statement. She never touched anything, never watered the plants, said, "What's the point? They'll die anyway." But this flower hadn't died. Someone had been caring for it. Someone had been coming here regularly. Marcus pulled out his phone and photographed the orchid. Then he put the phone away and fell into thought. Images began surfacing in his mind. Other houses, other deaths, accidental deaths, wealthy neighborhoods. A woman fell down the stairs, the house in perfect condition, azaleas in the foyer fresh. A man poisoned by mushrooms, the hedges trimmed the day before. Another case, a gas leak, but the yard looked like something from a magazine cover. Back then, Marcus hadn't thought much of it. Coincidence. Rich people hire gardeners, landscapers. Normal. But now the coincidences were forming a pattern. Someone had been entering victims' homes under legitimate pretenses and leaving behind not chaos, but order. Marcus glanced back. The young detectives still stood by the staircase, discussing something. The tech had gone downstairs with his equipment. No one was watching him. Marcus approached the windowsill, pulled a plastic bag from his pocket, the kind he always carried just in case. He used his fingernail to lift the edge of the soil in the pot, carefully scooped some into the bag, sealed it, slipped it into his pocket. His hands moved automatically, like on hundreds of past cases. But inside, Marcus knew he was breaking protocol. This wouldn't be checked through official channels. Hayes had made that clear. The case was closed. But Marcus didn't care. This gesture had become a personal challenge to the system. He left the house, got in his car, and drove back. The neighborhood fell behind, the gate arm lowered, and with it dropped the boundary between two worlds. Marcus drove in silence, drumming his fingers on the wheel to the rhythm of some forgotten tune. A plan was already taking shape in his mind. The district precinct greeted him with the usual hum of voices, ringing phones, and the smell of cheap coffee. Marcus walked past the duty desk, nodded to a familiar sergeant, climbed to the second floor. His desk stood in the corner, away from the windows. The computer was on, but the screen dark. Marcus didn't touch it. Instead, he went down to the archives. Electronic databases required official requests, passwords, logins, justifications. Marcus ignored all of that. Paper files lay in the basement, in metal cabinets smelling of dust and old paper. No cameras here, no colleagues, just him and the past. Marcus opened the cabinet holding files from the past 3 years. He pulled out folder after folder, spreading them across the table. Accidental deaths, wealthy neighborhoods. He wrote addresses, dates, names in his notebook. His handwriting was small, cramped, slanting heavily to the right. Sometimes the pressure tore the paper. Gradually, from the scattered cases, a system began to emerge. 5 cases over 2 years. Different causes of death: drowning, poisoning, falling, gas leak. But all in affluent neighborhoods. All wealthy people. And in every file appeared the same name: Greenhaven Landscaping. Owner: Nathan Voss. Marcus leaned back in his chair. In the silence of the archives, only the rustle of pages could be heard. He reread the name several times. Voss. Not just a gardener, a constant element in every tragedy. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket and typed the name into a search engine. The company website loaded instantly. Photos of pristine lawns, manicured flower beds, sculpted hedges, the aesthetic of control. On the About Us page was a photo of Voss, a man in his late 30s, lean, with dark brown hair and gray-green eyes. A polite smile, gloved hands holding pruning shears. Marcus closed the phone. He stood, gathered the files back into the cabinet, and headed upstairs. It was already 1:30. Lunch had long passed, but he felt no hunger. Instead, a certainty was building in his chest. Cold, heavy, almost painful. He left the precinct, got in his car, and drove to an address he'd copied from one of the files. The house was even farther from the city, almost at the county line. Security here was tighter. Cameras hung from every post, the gate arm lowered, the guard booth enclosed in glass. Marcus pulled up and showed his badge. The guard looked at him, then at the credentials, then back at him. "What's this about?" "Routine inspection. Everything's fine here. I need access to lot number 9. Not without the owner's permission. I have a badge. This is private property." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The guard looked at him calmly, but firmly. In this place, state law yielded to private contract. "Call the owner." "He's out. When's he back?" "Don't know." Marcus stared at him for several more seconds, then nodded and turned the car around. As he drove away, he memorized every detail of the property, the height of the fence, the placement of cameras, the color of the lawn. Control was slipping from his grasp, but he wasn't about to surrender. The next morning, Marcus went to Captain Hayes. His office was on the 3rd floor, corner position, windows overlooking the square. Hayes sat at his desk, reviewing documents. Marcus entered without knocking and closed the door. "Captain, I've got information." Hayes looked up. "I'm listening." Marcus set his notebook on the desk, opened to the page with names and addresses. 5 accidental deaths over 2 years. All in wealthy neighborhoods. All affluent victims. And in every case, the same landscaper appears. Nathan Voss. Hayes glanced at the notebook, then at Marcus. So what? It's not a coincidence. The orchid in yesterday's victim's house was perfect. Someone had been caring for it. Someone had been coming regularly. The landscaper came. That's his job. But why do all this landscaper's clients end up dead? Hayes leaned back in his chair. His face remained calm, but irritation flickered in his eyes. "Brennan, do you understand what you're saying?" "I do. I want to run tests on the soil. Check for toxins, chemicals." "There will be no tests, but the case is closed." Hayes raised his voice, then lowered it again. "You've been at this for how many years, Marcus? Don't you get it? Statistics, clearance rates, neighborhood stability. Your initiative is damaging." Marcus stayed silent. Hayes continued, softer now, almost paternal. "Making it to retirement without scandals. That's the smart move. You've got 3 months left. Don't ruin your reputation." Marcus took the notebook from the desk, turned toward the door. Understood. He left. The hallway was empty. Marcus walked to the staircase and descended. An emptiness burned in his chest. He was alone now, and there was no going back. The apartment greeted Marcus Brennan with silence. Not the kind that soothes after a long day, but the muffled, oppressive kind, as if the walls had absorbed years of solitude and were now giving it all back. He didn't undress. The coat stayed on his shoulders, the shoes on his feet. He walked to the kitchen and sank onto the edge of a chair, staring at the blank television screen. It reflected his silhouette, hunched and motionless. Outside the window, the boulevard hummed. Cars, sirens, voices. The noise drowned out thought, but didn't touch the anxiety. That sat deeper, beneath his ribs, heavy and cold. Marcus rubbed the bridge of his nose with thumb and forefinger, closed his eyes. Hayes had said, "Case is closed." Not, "We'll look into it." Not, "Let's figure this out." Closed. Like a verdict. The system Marcus had served for 35 years hadn't made a mistake. It had chosen convenience. Deliberately. Statistics mattered more than truth. Neighborhood tranquility mattered more than justice. That thought burned hotter than exhaustion. He stretched his legs, heard his right knee ache, an old injury that always flared up before rain. But there was no rain. His body was just giving up first. Retirement. A word that used to sound like a formality now sounded like a sentence. 3 months. 90 days until they took his badge forever, and he became just Marcus, a retiree from Queens, needed by no one. Marcus opened his eyes and pulled the notebook from his coat's inner pocket. The pages were wrinkled, corners bent. He flipped through slowly, rereading notes made at the crime scene. Time, circumstances, the orchid, perfect amid the chaos of neglect. His handwriting, small and slanted, filled the lines like code only he could decipher. Official channels were closed. Hayes had made that clear. No tests, no investigation. That meant he'd have to act differently. Marcus understood the risk. Going rogue could cost him his pension, could cost him his last years of service, could cost him his reputation. But what was reputation if a woman was dead and her killer walked free? He turned the page. Names of victims. 5 people over 2 years. He remembered them. Sarah Mitchell, 43, fell down the stairs. David Carson, 51, mushroom poisoning. 3 others. Marcus remembered the faces in the case file photos, remembered the addresses, remembered closing folders, signing reports. Accidental deaths. But now he saw the pattern. This wasn't about ambition. Marcus closed the notebook and set it on the table. This was about personal accountability to those he hadn't protected, to those whose names he still remembered. He stood and walked to the bedroom, opened the closet. His uniform hung on a hanger, pressed, familiar. But tomorrow he wouldn't wear it. Marcus pulled out an old jacket, gray and worn, no identifying marks. Jeans he wore to his cabin upstate. Sneakers instead of heavy dress shoes. The badge stays home. The department-issued phone goes in the desk drawer. Returning to the kitchen, Marcus picked up the notebook again and opened the Greenhaven website on his aging smartphone. The screen glowed dimly. Photos of flawless lawns, flower beds, hedges, everything too perfect. Client testimonials, professional, attentive, exceeded expectations. Marcus scrolled to the About Us page. Voss's photo. A man in his late 30s, lean, gray-green eyes, polite smile. Gloved hands holding pruning shears. Marcus zoomed in on the image. The face was calm, no aggression, no tension. A man confident in himself. Or a man who'd learned to hide. The cover story had to be simple. A cabin owner tired of weeds. That kind of client wouldn't raise suspicion. Marcus wrote in his notebook, "Quarter-acre lot, neglected. Need consultation on maintenance." Neutral. Ordinary. No hints about law enforcement, no questions about past clients. The only chance of getting close to Voss was to look like someone from his usual clientele, not a threat. Marcus understood his opponent was smart. One wrong gesture, one careless word, and the door would slam shut forever. He turned off the phone and set the notebook aside, walked to the window. The boulevard beyond the glass carried on with its life. People heading home, shops closing. An ordinary evening. And somewhere in a gated community lay a woman no one would call a murder victim. Because that was more convenient. Marcus clenched his fists, then released them. Tomorrow he would begin. The location was on the city's outskirts, in an industrial zone where old garages neighbored new warehouses. The landscaping studio occupied a single-story building with large windows and a sign in clean lettering. Marcus parked off to the side and cut the engine. He sat for several minutes, observing. Nathan Voss worked in the yard. Focused, precise, never looking around. Before him lay a row of potted plants, tools arranged in strict order, pruning shears, gloves, trowel, sprayer. Every movement calculated. No rushing, no haste. Marcus got out of the car and straightened his jacket collar. He approached. Voss looked up, noticed his visitor, smiled politely, and removed his gloves. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" The voice was soft, even, velvety. Marcus nodded. "Afternoon. I'd like some advice. Got a property upstate. Weeds have taken over the whole garden." "I see." Voss wiped his hands on a towel hanging from his belt. "How big is the property?" "Quarter acre." "How long has it been neglected?" "About 3 years." "Then you'll need a comprehensive approach." Voss walked to a table and pulled out a tablet. "First, we need to determine soil type, acidity levels, then choose a weed control method, chemical or mechanical." Marcus listened carefully. Voss explained in detail, not simplifying the terminology, as if he assumed his listener could understand. Marcus noted, no condescension, no desire to rush through the conversation. Voss spoke as if he had all the time in the world. "And the chemicals?" Marcus paused. "Are they safe?" Voss looked up, gray-green eyes calm. "Depends on the dosage. Any substance in excess becomes poison, even water. But some plants are naturally toxic." "True." Voss smiled. "Nature doesn't divide the world into good and evil. It just exists. Poison is a tool. Weeds don't die tragically. They die correctly. Because they interfere with the growth of what matters more." Marcus said nothing. The phrasing sounded philosophical, impeccable. Voss didn't tense, didn't look away, didn't close off. He spoke about it as calmly as he would about soil types. "Interesting perspective," Marcus said. "Professional." Voss set the tablet aside. "I can come out to the property, do an assessment. Site visit is $150. If you decide to hire me, that amount goes toward the total cost." "Got it. I'll think about it." "Of course." Voss extended a business card. "Call anytime." Marcus took the card. The paper was thick, quality stock. The contact information printed evenly. He nodded, turned, and walked back to his car. Got behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. He watched in the rearview mirror. Voss returned to his work, put his gloves back on, picked up the shears, continued pruning plants as if the conversation had never happened. Marcus gripped the wheel. No direct evidence. Suspicion remained intuition. Dangerous. Unreliable. Voss hadn't made a single mistake, didn't deny anything, didn't justify himself. He used the topic of poisons as part of his own image, a philosophy about the rightful death of weeds. Marcus started the engine. He drove away with a sense of defeat. He'd encountered an adversary who surpassed him in composure. It undermined his confidence, intensified the pressure inside. The complaint came 2 days later. Marcus was at home working a crossword puzzle in the newspaper when the phone rang. Hayes's number. Marcus picked up. "Brennan." "Marcus, come in tomorrow, 9 sharp." The captain's voice was dry, businesslike. "What's this about?" "We'll talk." A short beep. Marcus set the phone down. His chest went cold. A complaint, either from the security guard or from Voss himself. He imagined the landscaper calling the precinct, politely inquiring why a stranger was asking odd questions about poisons. Carefully, without accusations, just a notification. The next morning, Marcus put on his uniform, ironed the shirt, polished the shoes. If this was the end, he'd meet it with dignity. He arrived at the precinct at exactly 9, climbed to the 3rd floor. The hallway was empty. Hayes's office door was ajar. Marcus entered. Hayes sat at his desk, a folder open in front of him. The captain didn't look up. "Sit." Marcus sat. Hayes turned a page, read something, nodded to himself. "Got a call from private security. Says Detective Brennan trying to access private property without owner permission." Then another from a citizen named Voss. Says someone came by posing as a property owner, but asking strange questions about toxic plants. Marcus stayed silent. Hayes looked up. "What are you doing, Marcus?" "My job." "Your job?" Hayes leaned back in his chair. "The case is closed. I gave clear instructions. You violated procedure. You're undermining this department's credibility. The woman was murdered, that's obvious. Obvious to you. To me, it's paranoia." Hayes raised his voice, then lowered it. "Do you understand what you're doing? Private security, wealthy clients, complaints. Do we need this? We need the truth." "Truth?" Hayes smirked. "Truth is what's written in the report. Everything else is speculation." Marcus clenched his jaw. Hayes opened a desk drawer and pulled out 2 items, a service badge and a service weapon. He placed them in front of him. "Turn in your badge and gun." Marcus didn't move. "Captain, that's an order. You're suspended from duty. Mandatory leave pending further review. Access to databases and labs revoked. I'll process the paperwork today." Marcus slowly stood. He unfastened his holster, removed the weapon, and placed it on the desk. He unpinned the badge from his shirt pocket. The metal felt cold, heavy. He handed it to Hayes. The captain took the items, slid them into a drawer, and turned the key. "You can go." Marcus turned toward the door. His hand stopped on the handle. "You're making a mistake." "No, Marcus. You are." Hayes opened the folder and began to read. The conversation was over. Marcus stepped into the hallway. His legs felt rubbery. Without his badge, he felt naked, stripped not only of authority, but of a part of himself. He went down to the 2nd floor. By the stairs stood the 2 young detectives from the scene. They traded a look. One smirked. "Hear the news? Brennan's been suspended." "Seriously?" the second snorted. "Old school. Finally burned out." Marcus walked past, eyes straight ahead. Their muffled laughter stabbed at his back. Halfway down the stairs, the world tilted. His blood pressure spiked. He grabbed the railing and stopped. His breathing turned ragged. Black dots swam in his vision. "Need a hand?" one of them called. "No." Marcus straightened, slowly made his way down, and stepped outside. He got into his car and sat there for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. His heart hammered. His ears rang. Admitting weakness would mean accepting the role of a man who'd been discarded. Marcus pulled a mint from his pocket, slipped it into his mouth. He waited for his breathing to steady. Then he started the engine. With his resources gone, Marcus turned to whatever he could find in public records. Society pages, articles on divorces and asset splits. He read through stories, hunting for names. Alina Warren. Divorce from a prominent businessman. Lawsuits. A house in a gated community. Marcus opened a map. Brookridge Grove. Same cluster as the first victim. Close by geographically. He wrote down the address, the house number, lined up the dates. The divorce had been finalized a month ago. Maximum risk. He drove out there in the evening. Warren's house was large, 2 stories with a high fence, security tighter than last time. Marcus didn't pull up to the gate. He parked on a side street and walked in. The lawn in front of the house was immaculate. Grass cut evenly, not a single weed. Flower bed edges clean and sharp. The hedge perfectly trimmed. Marcus stopped, studying the property. The work was fresh, a day old, 2 at most. He took out his phone and snapped a photo. Then he saw a white van pulling up to the gate. The logo on the side read, Greenhaven. Marcus stepped back into the shadow of the trees. The gate swung open. The van rolled inside. Voss climbed out of the cab. Gloves on, pruning shears at his belt. He walked the lawn, crouched, inspected the grass, ran his hand over the surface. Nodded, satisfied. Inspection. Marcus stood motionless, fingers locked around his phone. The stage was being set. Time was running out. Voss returned to the van, took out a sprayer, jotted something in a notebook. Then he got back behind the wheel and drove off. Marcus watched the van until it vanished. A cold weight settled in his chest. He was late. The lawn was already cut, but the killer had come back. Why? To make sure everything was ready, to add the final touch. Marcus turned and walked back to his car. Tomorrow he would return, with binoculars and a thermos of coffee. He would wait. He would catch Voss in the act. Or die trying. Marcus arrived at Alina Warren's house 3 hours before dusk. The sun hung low, throwing long shadows from fences and trees. He picked a spot on a nearby street, outside the range of the security cameras and patrol routes. His car came to rest beneath a sprawling maple whose bare branches hid his plates. He killed the engine and sat still for several minutes, listening to his own breathing. Warren's house was visible through a gap in the fence. 2 stories, wide windows, a flawless facade. No cars in the driveway, no lights in the windows. The silence felt thick, almost tangible. Marcus noted it. This kind of calm always came before something bad. He'd seen it before. Houses on the verge of tragedy seemed to hold their breath. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt sure of himself. Not that jittery, desperate hope that had driven him from the archive to the gated communities, but a hard, cold conviction. Voss would show. He had to. And Marcus would be ready. He unzipped his backpack and took out everything he'd brought. Binoculars, old, with a worn strap and scratched lenses. A thermos of coffee, a notebook and pencil. He set them on the passenger seat. He checked his sight line through the binoculars. The front gate was clear. So was the lawn. Marcus mapped the scene in his mind. Voss would drive up, park near the house, step out with his tools. Maybe head to the flower beds or the hedge. Maybe straight to the grass. The car cooled quickly. Condensation crept around the edges of the windows. Marcus cracked one open. Cold air rushed in, stinging his face. His knee throbbed. He rubbed it through the denim, feeling the stiffness in the joint. His body couldn't take these stakeouts the way it used to, but his experience remained. Experience told him this was how you sometimes caught people like Voss, through improvisation, patience, and a willingness to wait as long as it took. No badge, no gun, no backup. But he was on the job again, off the books. Time crawled. Marcus unscrewed the thermos and took a sip of coffee, bitter, lukewarm, but enough to sharpen his focus. He noted the time of arrival, the weather, the house number in his notebook. Habit turned ritual. He shut the notebook and placed it beside the binoculars. His fingers drummed on the wheel in rhythm with a forgotten tune. The van appeared without warning. White, clean, the Greenhaven logo on the side. Marcus froze. His heart kicked harder. He grabbed the binoculars and lifted them to his eyes. The van rolled forward slowly, smoothly, like the driver knew this route by heart. No hurry, no wasted motion. The gates opened on their own. The van pulled into the driveway and stopped by the steps. Voss climbed out, gloves already on, shears at his belt, work jacket spotless. Marcus didn't blink. His intuition had been right. This was the moment of confirmation. Now the killer would slip. Now something would happen he could document, prove, lay in front of Hayes. Voss walked around the van, opened the rear door, and pulled out a toolbox, set it on the ground, straightened up, scanned the yard. Marcus tensed. Voss went to the lawn, knelt, ran his fingers through the grass, stood, nodded to himself, returned to the van. Marcus lowered the binoculars to knead the bridge of his nose. Voss worked with methodical, professional ease. Marcus pictured the scene unfolding. The landscaper would open a hidden container, mix something into the soil or mist it over the grass. Then he'd pack everything away, erase the traces, and leave. A day or two later, Alina Warren would step barefoot onto the perfect lawn and drop dead. Marcus was already rehearsing what he'd say to Hayes. "I saw it myself. I have photos. The lab will confirm it." The captain wouldn't be able to shrug it off. The system would have to admit it had been wrong. Justice would finally tilt the other way. That certainty numbed the pain. His fatigue eased. The cold withdrew. Marcus raised the binoculars again. Voss sprayed something over the flower beds. Marcus leaned forward, trying to read the label. He couldn't. Voss moved to the hedge, trimmed a few branches. Careful, unrushed. He gathered the cuttings into a bag, returned to the van, stowed his tools. An hour passed. Voss pulled a water bottle from the cab, took a drink, screwed the cap back on. He circled the yard again, knelt near the edge of the lawn, jotted something in his notebook, stood, slipped the notebook into his pocket. Marcus waited. His heartbeat stayed steady, but anxiety began to seep into the cracks of his confidence. Another hour went by. His knee throbbed harder. Marcus shifted his position, stretched his legs under the wheel. His right foot went numb. He flexed it until pain shot up his calf. The coffee in the thermos had gone cold. He forced down the last swallow, flat, bitter, with a faint grit at the bottom. Voss kept working, methodical, professional. Nothing suspicious, nothing extra. Marcus lowered the binoculars onto his lap and closed his eyes. He rubbed the bridge of his nose again. Inside, his certainty started to splinter. Each minute of Voss's ordinary, unremarkable labor chipped away at Marcus's belief that he was right. Physically, he was done. His back ached. His neck was stiff. Breathing felt like work. In the car's quiet, a voice broke through. Soft, gentle, familiar. "Marcus, why are you still doing this?" "Helen." Marcus didn't open his eyes. His late wife's voice sounded so clear it was as if she were sitting beside him in the passenger seat. Tired. Persuasive. "You've already done everything you could. Let it go." Marcus clenched his fists. Guilt knifed through his chest. It had been the job that stole the time he should have spent with Helen. He'd missed the signs of her illness, failed to see her weakening. Because he was busy. Because he was chasing criminals while his own wife was dying. "Who is this for?" Her voice pressed. "You? The system? It already tossed you aside." Marcus opened his eyes. The side window reflected his face, unshaven, worn, shot through with red at the whites. Binoculars in his hands. He looked like a creep parked on a suburban street, like a stalker, like someone who'd gone too far and didn't know how to stop. A thought slipped past his defenses. Maybe the system was right. Hayes, the young detectives, even Voss with his philosophy about weeds, they all might be seeing things clearly. And Marcus was clinging to a fantasy because he couldn't admit he no longer mattered. He tore his gaze away from his reflection and looked back at Warren's house. Voss was loading tools into the box, closing the rear doors, taking off his gloves. Marcus raised the binoculars one more time. Last attempt. Last chance to catch a mistake. Voss took out a sprayer and walked to the lawn. Marcus tensed. Voss bent down and misted the edge of the grass, repeated the motion in several spots, straightened and inspected the result. Marcus adjusted the focus on the sprayer. The label came into view. Standard fertilizer. Legal. Available at any garden center. Marcus let the binoculars drop. A cold emptiness spread through his chest. Voss put the sprayer away and returned to the van, climbed into the cab, started the engine. The gates swung open. The van pulled out, turned right, and disappeared around the bend. Marcus didn't move. His theory had collapsed. Voss hadn't done anything illegal, nothing remotely suspicious. Just a landscaper doing his job. Fertilizer, trimming, plant care. Suddenly Hayes's doubts seemed justified. The young detective's mockery made awful sense. Marcus was just an old, stubborn paranoiac who'd invented an enemy to avoid facing his own irrelevance. A man who'd seen a killer in a man with shears, who'd burned through his remaining strength chasing a ghost. Marcus pulled out his phone. His hands shook. He found Hayes's number in his contacts. His thumb hovered over the call button. Admit defeat. Say, "You were right, Captain. I was wrong." Apologize. Step aside quietly. Glide into retirement without scandal. Footsteps crunched outside the car. Marcus looked up. A patrol cruiser had stopped alongside him. A young officer, maybe 30, uniform still stiff from newness, stepped out. He walked toward the sedan, hand hovering near his holster. Marcus lowered the phone. His blood pressure surged again. His ears filled with a high, thin whine. The neighbors had called. Suspicious car. Stranger with binoculars. This could end in detainment. Explanations. Background checks. Complete ruin. The officer rapped on the window. Marcus rolled it down. A slap of icy air hit his face. "License and registration," the officer said. His voice was even, cautious. Marcus handed over his license. The officer studied it, then looked him over. "What are you doing out here?" "Waiting for someone." "Who?" "A friend. We plan to meet." "Why here?" "He lives nearby." The officer looked around. His gaze slid over the binoculars on the passenger seat, the thermos, the notebook. The neighbors complained. "Say this car's been here 3 hours. He's running late. I'm waiting. You carrying any ID?" Marcus froze. He didn't have his badge anymore. Hayes had taken it. The officer waited. Marcus slowly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out an old photocopy he kept at home, just in case. He handed it over. The officer took it, studied it, then looked back at Marcus. "You on duty?" "Retired. Just doing a favor. Checking on something." "What kind of something?" "Private matter. Someone's missing. Family asked me to look into it." The lie came smooth. 35 years on the job had taught him how to speak calmly, confidently, without breaking eye contact. The officer stayed quiet for a few seconds, then handed the papers back. "If we get any more calls, I'll have to look into this a lot closer." "Understood." The officer turned and walked back to his cruiser. He got in, slammed the door. Marcus rolled the window up. His hands were shaking. He sat there for a few seconds, trying to pull himself together. His breathing was shallow. His heart pounded. There wouldn't be a second chance. Any further interference would end with him in handcuffs. It was now or never. But now it was already too late. Voss was gone. Nothing had happened. Marcus was alone in a cold car with an empty thermos and a broken theory. The patrol car pulled away, turned around, and disappeared. Marcus watched it go. Then he looked back at Warren's house. The windows were still dark, the lawn still perfect, the silence unbroken. He picked up his phone, found Hayes's number again. His thumb rested on the call button. One tap, and it would all be over. Admission of defeat. Return to reality. To retirement. Loneliness. The empty apartment in Queens. He dialed, pressed the phone to his ear. Long rings. Hayes didn't pick up. Marcus lowered the phone and set it on his knees. He closed his eyes. "Helen, I'm tired." His wife's voice didn't answer. The silence inside the car turned absolute. Marcus opened his eyes, looked at the house one last time, reached for the ignition. Time to leave. Time to accept that the old detective wasn't needed anymore. That justice was an illusion. That the system had won. His hand stopped on the key. The front door of Warren's house opened. A woman stepped out. Tall, slender, in a light robe. Alina Warren. Marcus recognized her from society photos. She walked onto the porch, barefoot. Came down the steps, followed the path toward the lawn. Stopped at the edge, looked down at the grass. Stepped onto it. Marcus snatched up the binoculars and brought them into focus. Alina stood in the middle of the lawn, watching the sunset. Calm, relaxed. He lowered the binoculars. Nothing was happening. She'd just stepped out for air. An ordinary woman. An ordinary evening. He lifted the phone to his ear again. Hayes still wasn't answering. Marcus was about to hang up when he saw movement. Alina wavered. Her hand flew to her throat. She took a step, stumbled, dropped to her knees. Her mouth opened, but no sound reached him. She clawed at the grass, trying to push herself up, collapsed face first. Marcus dropped the phone. He yanked the car door open and lunged out, running for the house. Marcus had been gripping his phone so tightly his fingers had gone numb. The screen still glowed with Hayes's number. One finger hovered over call. One press, and it would all be over. Admission, apology, a quiet exit. After Voss left, Warren's house had looked complete, empty, the lawn perfect, the windows dark, silence absolute. Marcus lowered his eyes to the phone. Hayes had been right. The kids in the squad room had been right. The system had been right. The shame burned hotter than the cold in the car. Not because he'd been wrong, but because he'd allowed himself to believe in a last chance, in his own judgment, in justice. 60 years alive, 35 on the job, and not a single piece of proof. Just the intuition of an aging paranoiac. Retirement no longer felt like a formality. It sounded like a sentence. The empty apartment. Silence instead of sirens. Crosswords instead of case files. The official "you were wrong" spoken by Hayes with tired sympathy. That weighed more than the arthritis in his knee, more than the burning in his chest. Marcus lifted the phone again. Long rings. Hayes still didn't pick up. Marcus was about to leave a message when something flickered in the corner of his eye. The front door of Warren's house opened. He lowered the phone. A woman stepped onto the porch, tall, slender, in a light robe. Alina Warren. He recognized her from the photos. Same confident posture, same curated carelessness. She came down the steps barefoot, unhurried, as if she had nowhere to be. Walked along the path to the lawn, stopped at the edge, looked down at the grass, tilted her head as if listening to something. Stepped onto the lawn. Marcus lifted the binoculars and adjusted the focus. Alina stood in the middle of the perfect green, watching the sunset. Calm, at ease. Her arms hung loosely at her sides. Her breathing looked steady. Nothing was happening. He lowered the binoculars. An ordinary woman, an ordinary evening. She'd stepped outside to feel the grass under her feet, to breathe, a gesture of peace and control over her own space. He raised the phone again. Hayes still didn't answer. Marcus was about to hang up when he saw Alina sway. The movement was barely there. She took a step forward and stopped. Her hand rose slowly to her throat. Her fingers tightened at her neck. Marcus straightened in his seat and narrowed his eyes. Alina took another step, tripped over her own legs, fell to her knees. Her mouth opened, but he heard no scream. She grabbed at the grass with both hands, trying to push herself up. Her arms folded under her. She dropped, face first. Marcus let the phone slip from his hand. He flung the car door open and hurled himself out into the cold. The air hit him like a slap. He ran for the house. The gate was shut. He circled the fence, found a lower section, climbed over, crashed down on the far side. His knee exploded with pain. He didn't stop. Alina lay motionless. Her face had drained of color. Her lips were turning blue. Her breathing came in ragged, whistling bursts. Marcus stopped about 10 feet from the lawn. His brain shifted into automatic. Pieces clicked together in a flash. Standard fertilizer, meticulously prepared soil, no direct contact. Voss hadn't killed with a single blow. He'd built conditions. A binary compound. Separately, the substances would be harmless. Together, lethal. Voss had treated the soil ahead of time, then added the catalyst today. Safe by itself, but mixed with the first layer. Poison. Gas. Invisible. Fast. Marcus reached for his phone. His fingers met empty air. The phone was still in the car. Calling 911 would take time. Paramedics would arrive in 10 minutes. Alina was suffocating now. The decision came instantly. Marcus drew in one breath and held it, then stepped onto the lawn. The first strides were easy. The grass felt soft underfoot. Then the burning began in his chest. His lungs protested the held breath. A faint sweetness hung in the air, edged with metal. Marcus clenched his teeth. He could not breathe. Not once. He reached Alina and locked his arms under hers. Her body was heavy, limp. She coughed and jerked, fighting for air. Marcus dragged her toward the edge of the lawn. His shoes slipped on the grass. His vision began to darken at the edges. His lungs felt aflame. 3 more feet. He stumbled and dropped to one knee. Pain shot up his leg. He didn't let go. He hauled himself up and kept pulling. Every movement took conscious effort. His pulse pounded in his skull. Black flecks swarmed at the center of his vision. 2 feet. Alina's body went slack. The twitching stopped. Panic knifed through him. She was dying. He was dragging a corpse. Too late. Again. 1 foot. The edge of the lawn seemed impossibly far. Marcus made one last lunge. They tumbled together onto the pavement. Air slammed into his lungs, sharp, dirty, freezing. He started to cough, a metallic taste flooding his mouth. His chest burned. His ears rang.
Alina lay beside him, still.
Marcus rolled her onto her side, checked her pulse. Faint, irregular, but there. Her breathing was returning, slowly, with effort, but she was breathing. He let himself fall back onto the asphalt, closed his eyes. Coughs racked his throat. Every breath hurt. He knew he'd been poisoned, too. Not fatally, but enough that the damage would linger. Somewhere in the distance, a siren began to wail. Someone had called it in. A neighbor, or maybe the patrol had circled back. Marcus opened his eyes. The sky overhead was a flat, cold gray. He'd saved her. The job was done.
The ambulance arrived first. The medics jumped out with stretchers and rushed over. One bent over Alina, the other over Marcus. A mask went over his face, and oxygen washed into his lungs. Relief came slowly. His chest still burned.
"What happened?"
one medic asked.
"The lawn," Marcus forced out. "It's poisoned. Binary compound." The medic nodded and passed the message on over the radio. They lifted Marcus onto a stretcher and carried him to the ambulance. Another team lifted Alina. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was steady now.
Police cruisers rolled up next. Officers cordoned off the property. Hazmat techs climbed out of a van with instruments and started sampling the soil. Marcus watched them through the open doors of the ambulance. One officer stepped closer.
"You able to talk?"
Marcus nodded and lowered the mask. The landscaper, Nathan Voss. He prepped the soil in advance, added the catalyst today. Binary toxin. The officer wrote it down and nodded. "We'll look into it." The ambulance pulled away with Marcus and Alina inside. The city blurred past the windows. Gray buildings, dull streetlights, empty roads. Marcus closed his eyes. Exhaustion crashed over him all at once. He'd done it. Saved a life. Proven he was right. But the hollow feeling remained. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and silence. They put Marcus in a room, hooked up an IV, ran blood tests. The doctor said it was mild poisoning. He'd be fine in a week. Lucky. Marcus lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The oxygen mask fogged with each breath. The pain in his chest was fading. The door opened. Hayes stepped in. The captain stopped at the foot of the bed and studied him without speaking. Then he held out his hand. Marcus's badge lay in his palm. "You were right," Hayes said quietly. Marcus took the badge. The metal was cold, familiar. He closed his fingers around it. Voss? In custody. Lab confirmed the binary toxin. Soil samples match compounds from his van. Lawyers are already at it, but we've got a case. Marcus nodded. Hayes lingered a moment more, then turned and walked out. He didn't apologize, didn't say thank you. He just handed the badge back. Marcus set it on the bedside table and looked at it. A victory. Temporary, but still a victory. The system had admitted its mistake, but nothing really had changed. 3 months passed. Marcus sat on the front steps of his cabin, a fresh newspaper in his hands. A headline on page 3 read, "Renowned landscaper cleared of all charges." He read slowly, taking in every line. The defense had pinned the blame on negligent suppliers who'd provided the fertilizer. Voss had no knowledge of the chemical reaction. An unfortunate accident. Financial settlement. Case closed. Alina Warren had reconciled with her husband, dropped all claims, returned to her old life. Marcus folded the paper and set it beside him on the bench. He looked at the yard in front of the cabin. Overgrown, wild, untouched by order. Weeds crowded out the beds. The grass grew in ragged clumps. Branches tangled overhead. But there was life here, real life, rough, uncontrolled.
He stood and walked to the edge of the property, bent down and yanked a weed from the soil. The root slid free, leaving a small hollow behind. Marcus studied it for a second, then tossed it aside. One weed. But the roots of the system ran far deeper, beyond the reach of any shovel he could lift. He straightened and looked toward the horizon. The sun was dropping behind the trees, painting the sky a bruised orange. Evening cold began to work its way through his jacket. He turned back to the house, stepped onto the porch, closed the door behind him. The silence inside the cabin wrapped around him. Not the suffocating quiet of his apartment in Queens, a different kind. Calm. Empty, but honest. Marcus sat at the table, opened a crossword, and picked up a pencil. He started filling in the squares. Automatic. Familiar. Justice was an illusion. The system was untouchable. But he'd done what he could. The rest was no longer his concern.